All right, so all the way from London, we have Henry Langridge, a tax consultant from London. He came all this way to Dubai to meet me here, talk about tax face to face. How do you find Dubai so far?
Yeah, it's lovely. I think we, as Brits, enjoy the weather because we just have terrible weather all year.
Yeah.
A lot of rain, a lot of clouds.
Yeah.
But also, as a tax advisor, I'm seeing a lot of exodus. So I've seen a lot.
Oh yeah, like people are like, I actually put UK time in my regular. I have two watches at home. One's like UAE time and UK time, just from the amount of clients coming through.
I mean, it's the home away from home. I think we're seeing a lot of people who are fed up, quite frankly, people who are leaving the UK. I mean, obviously, we've just had an election. So whatever the outcome of that election, there was going to be a level of uncertainty. And as tax people, the uncertainty usually means people want to talk to us and want to hopefully come up with a plan that can assist them, and specifically in the context of saving money.
Yes.
A good tax advisor should never cost you money. They should save you money.
Yeah.
So we're always poised to be the vessel to help people get out of the UK, or in some cases, maybe just optimize their affairs to make it sometimes just more tax efficient without actually having to leave the UK.
No, and that's another thing about the cost of living issue that came up in the UK. Well, okay, let's just say that after a while you start paying people in UK more. They haven't amended the tax bracket, so you could pay more and they'll take more.
Yeah, these are called stealth taxes. So stealth taxes are essentially when tax bands are kept the same, and wages grow, even if it's in line with inflation. So you're still making the exact same money you did, just in line with inflation.
But you're losing more.
But you're losing more, and you're spending more money on taxes because the band at which you pay higher rate or additional rate tax is the same. So now you're paying more tax than you did. So essentially, it is a tax on inflation. That gets
and then once you beat that inflation by making more money, you're taxed again for making more.
Exactly right. It's a tax death trap. Exactly right. It's a tax death trap. We have a system whereby you're taxed on income, and then you need to pay the tax. You make more income, and then you're taxed on that, and it just keeps spiraling and spiraling.
Yeah. Do you think that do you perceive a regression in the tax code in the UK or US anytime soon, or you just don't see that happening?
So I'm very optimistic about the future, and I think we're going to see a lot more changes in the next few decades. The only problem is I think there's going to be certain adjustments required and changes in personnel and just even thinking. I think right now no one's ready to have the conversation that we are maybe perhaps the taxes are too high. I think most people probably think that wealthy people should pay more. When in reality, if you tax them too high, then they're just going to leave, and then you end up with no tax. So
I also think that there's this mentality of, well, we need more money in the system to fix it, but it just seems purely like an efficiency issue.
Oh, exactly right.
The UK is enormously wealthy. It's the most expensive property on earth, and it's just been building for hundreds of years. So, like, if there's anyone that doesn't need more money, it's probably the UK into their tax system, right?
That's exactly right. And I think we've seen, obviously, in the US with the Department of Government Efficiency, there's a lot more sentiment about how the government is spending money.
Exactly.
And how much waste there is in the system. And I think most people don't mind paying an amount of tax. From my experience, the percentage is about 20%. But in general, people don't mind paying some amount of tax. What they don't like is when you're working essentially 50% of the year for free for the government, and there's no incentive, and people just don't want to work because there's just, if you work more, you're essentially taxed more. So why do that?
What is it? Well, I've heard someone quote this. Maybe it was Jimmy Carr's, like, one for you, one for me.
One for you, one for me. That's right.
Which is insane. Like,
and I think there's from an incentive point of view, it's not that people aren't hardworking or people are somehow lazy. In fact, actually, with AI, people are becoming more productive. So people can actually do more per hour of work and generate more economic activity.
I've never like, so we work with people from all over the world. The people that come from the UK here to work, they grind. They do fine in Dubai. They are white knuckling their way into their jobs and getting promotions and kind of going up the corporate ladder fairly quickly, because I think that they're finally feeling the benefit of their hard work in terms of real income in the UAE.
That's right. And it's a really good quote. Good friend of mine said that the UK is a great place to spend money. It's not a great place to make money. So a lot of people, they come here, they grind, and then they go back and they spend their money. And that's a really wise strategy, because if you can essentially retire earlier by working fewer years in the UAE, then I think it's a really sensible idea. And a lot of our clients are very interested in coming here for sort of 5 to 10 years and then returning back to where they came and taking that money with them.
So there is this myth in our industry that you will always pay double tax if you live abroad. Is that true? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I think especially in this digital age, there's a lot of people who maybe go on holidays and they do a bit of work on the side. So there's sort of two answers to this. There's the technical position, and then there's sort of the common sense approach. Now, the common sense says, well, if you're a tax resident in the UK, for example, you're going to pay tax on your worldwide income in the UK. Now, if you do go abroad and you start working, maybe you're on holiday and you do some work on your laptop, then technically you are carrying out commercial activity in that country. That could be a tax liability. Now, double taxation agreements will help mitigate any double tax, i.e. you won't pay tax twice. But the problem is that if you are traveling and you're going to lots of different countries, not every country in the world has a double taxation agreement with the UK, for example. So you could end up with some serious, not necessarily double tax issues, but some really serious reporting requirements by virtue of you not paying tax in a country you should have. Now, if you had a double taxation agreement with the UK, then you can mitigate that by saying you're going to pay taxes over here. It becomes less complicated. But generally speaking, you should always talk to a tax advisor if you plan on doing any work abroad, because you don't want to end up with some sort of tax nexus.
So let's just say that you've moved to a low tax jurisdictions like UAE. How do you take advantage of that specifically?
Yeah, so if you come here for work, for example, you're probably going to be here for a few years. Yeah. So there are certain things you can do if you're an expat living in the UAE to essentially optimize your tax affairs whilst you're living here. Now, you do have to be very mindful of what the country you're going back to is going to do. So, for example, if you decide to go offshore for a year and sell a bunch of crypto and then go back to the UK, you're probably going to pay tax when you return to the UK.
So you need to be very aware of the return regulation once you come back.
I think there's too much disenchantment because people see zero tax as a headline and then think, okay, that's great. I can go there for 2 years, sell some assets, come back, and then repatriate all of that money back.
Which is not the case.
Which is not the case. But also, if you think about it, I think you have to be very careful in both senses, inbound and outbound. So when you move to that country, you have to be aware of what is your tax situation, and then when you come back to that country, what is your tax situation? Because you could be looking at tax on some asset you sold whilst you were abroad, and you acquired it prior to you moving to that country. So essentially you end up with capital gains tax on some crypto you sold, which you may have already spent the money. So you need to be very mindful what's going to happen when you come back.
A point that we kind of come across quite often, and we have a different set of headaches, is the crypto conversation of how does crypto factor into these things. And a lot of the times it seems to be like, well, for now it's okay, but we'll see. And how do you feel about crypto becoming kind of taking place in the current world as a medium of exchange, as money? Yeah. What's your take on that?
I mean, I'm very bullish on the US dollar as just an investment, as a hedge, as a means of exchange. I think the problem is you can never bet against the Federal Reserve. You can never beat, essentially, they are the dealer, and you can never really, if you're a crypto, you can never really viably compete with the US dollar. So I don't think we're going to see a delineation.
I agree. I think it's difficult to have something decentralized compete with something very, very extremely centralized and integrated with every transaction on Earth, basically.
Exactly. And I do see some really good use cases for crypto.
Absolutely.
And there are some really great opportunities for decentralized finance. But in general, I think the government of course, they're going to try and rein it in as much as possible because it gives up. Why would they give up their
Their monopoly over currency, essentially.
Exactly right. And also bear in mind, your taxes still need to be paid in fiat currency. So
exactly.
no matter...
Eventually, you're going to have to cash out anyway.
Exactly. And you cash out, there might be capital gain, there might be some tax to pay. So I think for a lot of people, crypto is a good investment strategy. But in general, it's not the only tool in your shed for if you want to be diversified, if you want to live in this DeFi future. But in general, I think the US is going to rein in a lot of crypto, and we're not going to see a replacement of the US dollar anytime soon.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I think Dubai has become sort of like the Miami of crypto. I'm noticing that there's just a lot of crypto enthusiasm.
Yes.
What's sort of the sentiment towards crypto in Dubai at the moment?
I think well, of course, in the Middle East, it's not just UAE, but it seems to be a magnet towards, Arabs of various ethnicities. So you have like Iraqis, Jordanian people, Egyptians. These are countries that didn't necessarily have the most stable currencies. So you can imagine when an online option that's easy to wire, move around, hard to track, hold down, it's very appealing to, nations or places that have a very destabilized nature, or has been for as long as I've been alive, right? Yeah. So I think that's the appeal. It's taking control and giving it more to the people, and I think that's the main thing that attracts.
And Dubai seems to be like the hub for all of the
absolutely
of the crypto. There's a lot of
absolutely
very wealthy people have come here, have made a lot of money in crypto.
Yes.
And there's no capital gains tax, so it's a very friendly environment for people to come and live and spend their money. But not necessarily tax-free in all cases.
What's the differences between specifically UK and US tax systems, and what do you think are the fundamental differences that people should know about?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I've been in US, UK tax in some capacity for the last decade, and the biggest difference between the US and the UK is just the level of reporting requirements. So for a US person, they have to file tax returns no matter where they live in the world.
Yeah.
It's called a citizenship basis of taxation. The UK doesn't have that. We have a residence base.
I mean, it might come around.
We don't. Australia is talking about bringing one in. It does exist in some various forms across the world. But for now, at least, it's a residence base of taxation in the UK. So we only tax people who are resident, and there's a residency test to determine what is a resident. So the big difference for me is always just the level of reporting requirements. A US tax return of the equivalent information as a UK tax return would probably be double or triple the size by pages. And just that's the volume of difference you see. So a US tax return, for example, you have to disclose things in addition to just your income. There might be requirements to file bank accounts and various other financial instruments you hold across the world. In the UK, it's more of a case of, does this asset produce income, in which case they're going to want to know about it.
A lot of people believe that you have to be a US citizen to invest in the US. You told me that's not true. I didn't know that. So how do you invest in the US without paying too much in taxes?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to invest in the US without generating a tax nexus in the US. You can use funds, you can use syndicates. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but in a nutshell, you can invest in the US, but the problem is that any mainstream brokerage account or anything, they're going to want you to fill out certain forms, and they're going to want to know a bit about you and where you pay your taxes. Now, if you live in the Middle East, that could be a potential problem because the US doesn't necessarily have a double taxation agreement with every country. So if you live in Saudi Arabia, for example, you could have a problem when it comes to investing in the US because the US might either not allow you, you might not be able to invest, or there might just be some tax, which just makes it
There's
a
also
worse investment.
The issue that people run into is that the equivalent document in your local tax jurisdiction doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Like personal income tax reporting is not a thing here.
That's right.
But it is in various other countries. So let's just say it was a prerequisite for you to invest in a fund. What are you going to do?
Exactly. So my business partner and I started a fund recently. We're launching later this year just to basically bridge that gap because I'm a tax advisor. I understand the issues that people run into. So why not come up with a solution that essentially just allows people to invest without the stress?
What do you see are the changes in the U.S. or you foresee to be the change in the U.S. now that you see Trump coming into office?
Yeah. So no doubt the next few years are going to be very challenging for a lot of different industries. For example, if you're shipping and exporting, tariffs are going to be a big part of your life. But in general, actually, I think the tax shouldn't really change too much. Now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017 that came in actually lowered taxes for businesses. That's probably going to remain the way it is, because essentially the tax take in the US is rising, so it's unlikely it's going to go down anytime soon. And in fact, a tax increase might not seem too crazy at the moment, so that we might see some changes in terms of lowering taxes for lower middle class people and increasing taxes in other areas, but probably not called tax increases. They'll probably call them, there's other taxes. For example, anyone who's familiar with Social Security, net investment income tax, there might be some tweaks there to essentially try and extract more money from higher earners.
So you're saying even though Trump's in office, you see taxes actually going up for about the past 3 months or so. And what I've found really shocking is that a lot of people are going to these larger firms. They're not really specialized or adequately communicating for cross-border situations such as UK to UAE, UK to Singapore, or any other jurisdiction. So it really is about finding specialists in specific jurisdictions and making them work with other specialists.
That's exactly it. I think there's a network effect when you know people in the industry. Chances are they know other people who are of a similar caliber and similar expertise. I mean, for you and me, for example, we have a really lovely, if you imagine like a Venn diagram, there's that crossover in the middle of UK domestic issues, UAE domestic issues, and then sort of a bit of both, those cross-border issues. And when we deal with clients, oftentimes it's usually because there's a trans sort of country issue, which means that we can both work together and we know our industries respectively, but also have an eye on each other's industries to understand what we need to know, because frankly, there's just so many new rules are being changed. And
absolutely.
As you probably know, there's a lot of people who are perhaps saying the incorrect things.
Yeah, very much so. And also, what you expect are the triggers from one jurisdiction to another are not very transparent. So, and even if you communicate that to a client or someone that's taking our services, they may not understand it as well as another consultant in another jurisdiction.
That's right. And sometimes I think, as you know, bad advice is worse than no advice. So being told you can spend X amount of days in a country, get a tax residence and not pay any income tax.
Exactly.
Sometimes that can really mess someone up when they find out that's certainly not the case. And in our industry as well, there are just a lot of people who are very confident that they know the answers. But when someone's not confident, it usually means that they don't know what they're talking about. But sometimes it's the opposite. When you're not confident, it's because sometimes the rules are just very complicated. Yeah. And there are no easy answers.
Absolutely. So, and I feel like it's the answers that we end up reaching is just kind of like, it's almost like building an ice sculpture. We whittle away at a problem continuously back and forth, checking from each person until we find something that fits. And unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all for all of our clients. We talk extensively. Our emails read like a book at times, and we very politely ask the client to not read them sometimes and just be like, oh, this is just for Henry to understand or for me to understand what your perspective is. And then we communicate that in summary in a long call or a finalized email of our conclusions and findings.
That's right.
And most of the time, I would say the conversations are probably like 20 to 30% tax and 70% the other problems that we have to deal with.
That's right. And I think, when you probably hear a lot about people moving to Dubai, they probably don't even know about the difficulty of obtaining a bank account or those types of things. I mean, what is your experience in terms of when someone comes to you with a question? It sounds like it's not just tax. It's usually there's a whole host of other things, finding a rental property, those sorts of things.
I think the core issue is that there are various, even when you're starting a business, there are compliance triggers per activity. Your nationality is also a factor into opening a business due to so many expats coming in of different, origin. So you really have to factor in everything, and more importantly, the jurisdictions that they're coming from as well. And once you have mapped out that solution, you give a tailored solution of where to license, what to choose, and then which bank to go to, which are the main 3 questions. But then I found clients would sometimes disappear on me, or at the very least they'd come back with a conflicting opinion because they spoke to someone somewhere or a relative say something. Well, that's why kind of we reached out to each other and kind of found a way to communicate effectively on what things look like on both sides. Just made things so much easier in the long run.
And I imagine a lot of people read stuff online and they come to you with these sort of incorrect facts. What's the sort of most common incorrect fact?
We've both voiced our frustrations of people leaning too heavily on ChatGPT for very serious matters in tax advice. And it's just there's so much misinformation and there's no clear answer because it is an evolving field in perpetuity. So there's been a lot of talk about AI getting rid of accountants specifically and tax advisors. And like, I laugh at that so loudly. How do you feel about AI in the tax field? I feel like it's kind of like Excel. It'll just make our work slightly easier, some templates here and there. But when it comes to detailed information, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, same here. I can't see. I think there is a use case for AI, and it's a very fabulous tool for doing very targeted exercises and tasks. But in general, I think the problem is that there's so much context. And yes, you can probably program an AI bot to take into account all of this context. But the problem is that the way that the large language model works is that it uses existing examples. So it's not original. So the problem is sometimes we have to come up with original ideas, and for an AI bot, it's just not always possible.
Also, there's so much liability involved.
Yeah.
That are you really going to risk it for a chatbot?
No, exactly. And also, your clients are not paying for AI. They're paying for you. And when, for example, a client comes to us with a question, they've probably already looked at the answer in ChatGPT. Most people who are about to spend some money, they've probably already done the low-hanging fruit. So there's no point trying to do low-hanging fruit when someone's paying you for your time.
Exactly. And most of the information's outdated or about to be outdated, or it's going to change tomorrow. And then
exactly. And when you're talking millions of pounds or dollars, it can be very, very material if you try to rely too much or you try to go by what ChatGPT is telling you. For example, it can just cost you way more money than if you just spend a few £1,000s trying to get some advice.
So we need to up our fees. We definitely need to up our fees. So there has been growing interest in Riyadh. The investment from the Saudi government has been immense into building their infrastructure. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I spent some time in Saudi Arabia, and it is a real growth market if you can wait. And I think the problem is Dubai has benefited from the network effect. So businesses came here and then other businesses came here and it just cascaded.
Exactly.
It's going to take decades, I think, maybe even years to really build up an infrastructure that is conducive to bring in businesses. So you need some big players, which, to be fair, they are some people moving.
Yes.
But I think for entrepreneurs like us, it's very difficult to make the cost benefit analysis because yes, you can, the tax regime, there's arguably lower taxes, especially on the corporate level, going to Saudi Arabia. But the problem is that what is the infrastructure there? Are there clients? I have very few clients there. And what is going to be the non-work life? And I think that when you have the work-life balance, I think Dubai offers both of those.
Yes.
There's a lot of places like London, they have really good work-life balance, but the taxes aren't so great.
Yeah.
So if they can solve the work-life balance, then I think we can potentially see Saudi being a really big player in the next few decades.
What is your go-to tips for expanding and considering corporate taxes?
Yeah. So I really enjoy working with international businesses because essentially you have several different jurisdictions. Usually it's the same jurisdictions. For example, the US, the UK are very big jurisdictions for businesses to expand to or from, and the UAE. So when a business comes to me and they need structure and advice, the first thing we look at is where are you doing business? Because you could have a company in Panama and do business in the US. You're not going to be paying Panamanian tax. You're going to be paying US tax.
Yeah.
So the key thing first is to get the structure right. So to really drill into what is happening and where is it happening, because to an extent, there is no getting out of certain taxes.
Yeah.
But what you can do is set up a structure whereby you can have a cost center or use intellectual property to essentially invoice within a corporate group to lower your taxes by moving money from a high tax jurisdiction, that's profits that's generated in a high tax country like the US,
Yes.
and move that profits to somewhere like Panama or the UAE where there's very low corporation tax. So that's called profit shifting, and you can do it to a certain extent. And of course, we've seen in the last few decades, big international corporations are using these techniques, and there is a limit to how much you can push it, but it is still genuinely legitimate.
So let's just say that you've moved to a low tax jurisdictions like UAE. How do you take advantage of that specifically?
Yeah, so if you come here for work, for example, you're probably going to be here for a few years.
Yeah.
So there are certain things you can do if you're an expat living in the UAE to essentially optimize your tax affairs whilst you're living here. Now, you do have to be very mindful of what the country you're going back to is going to do. So, for example, if you decide to go offshore for a year and sell a bunch of crypto and then go back to the UK, you're probably going to pay tax when you return to the UK.
So you need to be very aware of the return regulation
Exactly.
once you come back. Questions that you get quite often is, how do you invest in the US without any US tax issues?
Yeah, it's a really good question because essentially there are so many different ways to invest in the US, and you might want to invest in the US for many different reasons. US dollar exposure as a hedge. Also just it's a really strong growth economy. So there's lots of different ways to do it. The biggest problem is usually the tax, especially if you live in the Middle East, for example, where there might not be a personal income tax. How that US tax interaction is going to work with your local country might be very complicated. So what I've done is set up a fund that's coming out later this year that essentially makes all of that very easy. And you can just basically put your money into an investment asset and essentially not worry about the tax.
So I'm 32 going on 33. A business going well for a year. You are even younger. You're 26.
Yep.
Really young. What is your opinion on being the newer generation of youngish entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I'm very optimistic about my generation. So I'm from Generation Z or Z.
Yeah.
They are, in my opinion, I think I see a lot of entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes.
I think what it is being young has, yes, there's the experience, which I'm very fortunate to have very good mentors and people I follow who have given me some experience in how to run a business and how to be a tax advisor. But, you know, when it comes to running a business, I think what it comes down to is just, what would you do? And I think you and I are both the same in that we just expect to receive what we dish out.
Yes,
and, you know, we are not... It's not rocket science when you really think about it. If you expect, you know, someone to speak to you in a certain way, then that's how you should generally behave.
Do you want to see? I really was inspired by this one client. He started at 16, you know, younger than you at 26 or me at 33 when starting a business. And this, I guess I shouldn't call him a kid, but young man did so much more than I have in like a decade at most. And I think that, you know, I think that maybe the desire to open a business should start younger.
Speaking to some of my clients, they sort of see the UAE as a location to sort of get started in and then maybe go on to a different jurisdiction. It's sort of like a gateway into maybe lowering your taxes. Do you sort of see Dubai and the UAE as a end destination or as a transition?
I think that for some people it is an end destination because it's still very central. It's still very integrated with the jurisdictions that they want to do business with. And in one way, it's the best version of a zero tax jurisdiction. So you still have some rules. You still need to abide by them, of course. But compared to other countries, it is fairly reasonable. How much do you guys pay in the UK in corporate tax on the high end?
On the high end, you're looking at 25%.
That's
on the individual level, could go up to 45%.
Yeah, that's insane. Like I was born and raised here, so like just hearing those numbers, saying that doesn't sound right. Like it's just wrong.
Yeah, and I think in the UK in particular, we're taxing too many entrepreneurs, so people are leaving. And the unfortunate thing is now with post-COVID, businesses have moved online, so people can work pretty much anywhere. And why would you stay in a country where the taxes are high and the weather's bad when you can come here, do that job, make the same amount of money and pay less tax, and in some cases have a better quality of life.
Your dream fictional client. Like, for example, if you had to pick any fictional person to tax advise, who do you think would be the most fun?
I love watching these action films where, so for example, like James Bond,
Yeah.
and they go abroad and
Yeah,
they're doing their work.
the car's blown up. Is that a deductible? How do you factor that in?
My brain's always like, oh, what's the visa? What's the tax situation? You're going to another country. You're performing work duties.
Exactly.
I mean, there are certain exemptions for government employees, which again, only a nerd would know.
I mean, does he even have health insurance? He's just jumped through a car window. His premium must be out of control.
Yeah, I can't enjoy things because I think I'm too mechanical in my thinking.
You know what would be a really fun client? Like actually Dracula. Like, think about it. Like the estate
dies.
planning alone.
But he can never die. He's immortal.
Well, that's why you train your kids. Like, my kids are going to be a tax advisor.
You will never need inheritance tax advice.
Never.